in order to understand is the free education policy effective or not, and does it really provide equal opportunity for students entering university, and is it providing equity for all? We wanted to look into the background characteristics of students, particularly their wealth, their income background. And we wanted to see, starting with basic education, because there's a filtering process that happens in the middle. So as you can see in the presentation here, the Q1 is the poorest quintile, and Q5 is the wealthiest quintile. As you can see in basic education, there's no much difference in terms of the wealth quintiles and the enrollment of university. The change happens by entering secondary education, which is particularly associated with a lot of cost, given that there's a lot of private tutoring and so. Within secondary education, there are two tracks. One is the general secondary track, and the other is the vocational secondary track. The vocational secondary track is known to be attractive for those of the poorer quintiles, because it does not involve a lot of private tutoring, and most of them don't end up in university, only 7% who enter university. While the general secondary track, the main track for entering university, is very much associated with private tutoring, very high cost. And as you can see here, the wealthiest quintile is 61% of them enter university, while it's only 42% amongst the poorest quintile. As for university, of course, the bulk of vocational secondary students are omitted, so it's reflected on the enrollment within university. So you'd find that only 5% of the poorest quintile entering university, while 36% of the wealthiest quintile entering university. So it's a 1-to-7 ratio. And since, as you said, the quality of education that students receive is mainly based on their wealth, their income, and within the general secondary, people who can afford private tutoring and can afford private schools get to earn higher grades than those who don't. So those who are of the wealthiest quintiles have more likely to enter top-tier specializations within the university itself. So the top-tier specializations in Egypt are considered mainly medicine, engineering, pharmacy. So you'd find 33% of the wealthiest quintile entering medicine and engineering schools, while only 3% of the poorest quintile entering those schools. This is the same for business schools or commerce schools. However, this changes when the specializations that require less grades, so they become more attractive for the students who, or not more attractive, but the students who of the poorest quintiles get to enter the schools of arts and education, law and religious studies or theology, or mainly the University of Al-Azhar. Okay. So in the case of law schools and religious study schools, 40% of the poorest quintiles get to enter these schools, while only 13% of the wealthiest quintiles get to enter these schools, because they're not as prestigious, obviously, as the top-tier schools. Also, in terms of wealth, it's very segregated geographically. It's well known that lower Egypt is wealthier, and Upper Egypt tend to be poor. So, and this is reflected on the university enrollment, obviously. So we wanted to look at university enrollment by geographical location. And as you can see here, that urban governorates and Lower Egypt tend to have the highest enrollment rates, but Upper Egypt and especially in rural areas tend to have the lowest. As for gender, nationally, female students have the same share within the enrollment rates as male students. But geographically, this differs slightly. In urban areas, female students tend to be more. They surpass the number of male students. And in rural, Upper Egypt in precise, they tend to be less, given that it's a more conservative culture and it's not really acceptable for women to commute back and forth to university. As for the aims of the study, we wanted to see where do the hidden cost, the actual cost lie. So we wanted to understand the views of limited income students and parents on the costs, identify the strategies that are adopted by these students and parents in order to cover the costs, and generate bottom-up recommendations that would ensure a more equitable university education system. Okay. So the research methodology, it was an exploratory qualitative study. It mainly relied on focus group discussions with limited income students, males and females, from art schools and from science schools. By art schools, I mean theoretical, and by science schools, I mean practical schools. And parents, mothers and fathers. Also, we conducted in-depth interviews with male and female students, half of whom received financial aid from the university or from other institutions. This study was conducted in Suhaig, governorate of Upper Egypt, considered one of the poorest governorates, and in Alexandria in Lower Egypt. So the findings of the study. Everyone we interviewed complained from the high cost of university education. As you can see here, a father in Alexandria says the cost ranges between 5,000 to 8,000 Egyptian pounds, which is equivalent to $500, $800 per academic year, and it could reach to $1,000. This is totally unrelated to the tuition fees. The tuition fees are very nominal, almost $15 to $35. And as you can see here, the father in Suhaig says the tuition fees are not a big deal. The problem lies in the other costs, like buying textbooks, photocopying, and purchasing tools. So we wanted to see what are these other costs. One of the main reasons of this burden was the textbooks, the price of the textbooks. The price of the textbooks in science schools tend to be higher than those in art schools. However, students of art schools had more books, were required to buy more books. And when I say required, it's because professors employed tactics. They publish books that for their course, and they expect their students to buy it in order to pass the exam. So they would have like a form within the book for the student to fill out and cut out and hand it to the professor in order to make sure that the student bought it. So a female student in Alexandria said, I did not attend the exams in my first year because there were so many books to buy, and my brothers and sisters have been to university, have been university students, so I couldn't buy them. Also, a father in Suhaig said, I borrowed a textbook from my daughter from a friend of mine. The professor saw the book during his lecture and recognized it was an old edition as he changes the cover every year. She was forced to buy a new book afterwards. As for private tutoring isn't very, it's not as common as it is in general secondary education. But it still exists in university education. It tends to be higher, I mean more expensive in science major or science schools than in art schools. But many of the students we interviewed said they did not resort to private tutoring as they cannot afford this kind of money. For materials and supplies, there's a general lack of materials and supplies in university and public universities, particularly in laboratories and workshops. The students of science schools tend to pay more, obviously, because a more practical approach. A female student in Alexandria said, School of Vet Medicine has poor facilities, and sometimes we collect money to buy material. For instance, we want to examine the fetus face, so we buy quail eggs. For the transportation costs tend to be higher with female students as they want to, they pay more for safer means of transportation. Also, some of these students' parents would accompany them to the university, back and forth from the university, especially if they live in rural areas. A quote, I guess, from a girl in Suhaig. There were many girls who couldn't attend the 4 to 6 or 6 to 8 lectures because of transportation and possibility of being subjected to sexual harassment, so they had to drop the class. Some other students attended the lectures, but their parents had to accompany them during their commute. As for the strategies adopted by the students and parents to reduce the cost, the students generally said that they worked during the summertime. However, they said that they preferred not to work during the semester because that would affect their academic performance. So one of the female students said, I worked for a while studying in one semester, but got the worst grades. Also, it was more likely for female students in Alexandria to work as opposed to Suhaig, female students in Suhaig, because of the conservative culture and so. The students also try to economize on food and transportation. So, for example, they said they would skip classes sometimes just not to cover the cost of the transportation, and would economize on food and meals by preparing their own meals at home. As for parents tended to work more. Night shifts, raising poultry, especially in rural areas, raising poultry and cattle and so. But they also said that they tended to marry off their daughters to reduce the burden of the expenses. So one of the mothers, and of course this in turn reflected on the girls' pursuit of university education. So one of the quotes from a mother in Suhaig, I have 5 children, one of them was due to start university, but we were not able to cover her expenses, so we got her married. Her husband didn't want her to continue her studies, saying that even if she did complete her studies, he won't let her pursue a career. As for financial aid, many students, the university offers financial aid through the exemption of tuition fees. But as I said, tuition fees are nominal. Many of the students we interviewed didn't know about the financial aid at all. The financial aid also, the process of applying for a financial aid was was viewed as really bad for the students, or they thought it was a humiliating process. It's even called in Egypt shahadat al-faqr. From a quote from a female student, "My father is a pensioner, so I applied for financial aid in my second year in university. I felt humiliated by the treatment of the administrator in charge, as if I was taking something that I didn't have a right to. I didn't go back. I would rather ask my mother to borrow money than feel humiliated." Yeah, and they mentioned that there was favoritism and nepotism in securing financial aid as well. So finally, the recommendations. The students and the parents suggested an increase in financial support for students who cannot afford university education through scholarships, through businessmen donating money for public university and contributing to the improvement of public universities. Also, another suggestion was contribute to reducing the cost of textbooks, transportation, study materials. Like textbooks can be uploaded online, transportation can be offered by civil society members and the universities itself, and especially for rural areas. And study materials, the university can contract with suppliers in order to offer cheaper materials within the university. And finally, enhance the university's resources and students' capabilities. They wanted to see the university to capitalizing on the manpower they already have, which is the students, by employing them or hiring them within administrative jobs within the university, in order as well to prepare them for the labor market and to make them aware of, and they can cover the cost of the university. Thank you.